Welcome, everyone. I recognize that we have a number of people from around the world, so I'd like to take a moment, as is customary for Royal Roads, to recognize and acknowledge the lands where we are and thank the peoples who have been the stewards of these lands. So Royal Roads University acknowledges that we are located on the traditional lands of the Swepsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families who have lived here for thousands of years. This land has been part of the fabric of the life of the Indigenous communities long before Hatley Castle was built, and it will be long into the future. And it is with gratitude that we now learn and work and play here, where the past, present, and future Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff come together. So thank you for joining us today. And we also welcome you to put in the chat box where you might be coming in from if you feel like you would acknowledge the traditional lands where you are. So I'd like to take a minute and express gratitude for the stewardship of these lands and the opportunity for us to gather here today, especially on National Indigenous Peoples Day. I'd also like to send a thank you, a shout out to our sponsors. We have Ken Christie here from the Human Security and Peacebuilding Program and Janie Lee from the Intercultural and International Communications Programs at Royal Roads. So thank you so much for sponsoring us today and putting together and supporting, having your program support the lovely panelists that we will be hearing from in a few minutes. So thank you. I'll pass the baton to Ken Christie in just a few minutes to speak to us about why we're here today, but to bring an overall context about World Refugee Day. It falls each year on June 20th. We are celebrating it today on June 21st, given that it is a Monday and we're able to convene here with you today with greater ease. It is dedicated to refugees around the globe, and it was held globally for the first time on June 20th, 2001, commemorating the 50th anniversary of the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees. It shines a light on the rights, needs, and dreams of refugees, helping to mobilize political will and resources so that refugees can not only survive, but thrive. So with that overarching objective today, I'd like to pass the speaking baton or feather over to Ken Christie, Program Head for Human Security and Peacebuilding, to tell us a little bit about why we're gathered here today. So thank you and welcome, everyone.
Thanks so much, Athena, and welcome everyone to this webinar on World Refugee Day. I can't think of anything more important in the human security and peacebuilding field than to discuss refugees and migrants, vulnerable individuals who are in desperate need of a home and are fleeing their homeland because of political persecution or economic or environmental strife. We have some statistics just to fill you in. Currently at the end of 2020, there's roughly over 82.4 million forcibly displaced people worldwide, but the numbers have doubled in the past 8 years. 42% of those, or 35 million, are children below 18 years of age. And between 2018 and 2020, on average, 300,000 children were born into a refugee life per year. So 1 in 95 people, 1% of humanity are displaced, and the numbers are rising because we have conflicts that continue, and we have new conflicts that start up, and we have old conflicts that are still on the go. So with many conflicts raging and the increasing impacts of climate change, hundreds of millions of more will have to leave their homes in the future with no possibility of return. So the burden of making these circumstances better often fall onto refugees themselves. More specific, as of today, it's also falling on children, on tens of millions of displaced children, some of the most vulnerable people on the planet. So the way we as an international community address human conflict and insecurity, we need to be more mindful of the costs on refugees and specifically child refugees. It's also unequal, it's erratic, it's built on inherited privilege, subject to political objectives and non-moral objectives, and geared towards the interests of high-income countries. So in the Human Security and Peacebuilding Program, we have many students, many people interested in refugees, some of them who hold very high positions in the United Nations High Commission on Refugees and work in Africa, Latin America, Asia, all over the world, and are actually working to improve this situation, which is very desperate. What I'd like to do now is pass the forum over to Alessandra Vinhas. Alessandra is a former Brazilian diplomat, and as of Friday, she is an alumni of the MAIIC program. So congratulations, Alessandra, and it's over to you to introduce the next guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure to be here today, not only because of the International World Day for Refugees, but most of all to have the pleasure of talking with Helena. Helena is Brazilian, like myself. She is the executive producer and co-founder of Stratostorm, an award-winning creative studio specialized in digital solution and story-driven content for entertainment and advertisement that has offices in São Paulo, in Brazil, and in Los Angeles. She was born in a very small town in the south of Brazil, in a region that, believe it or not, has a climate very similar to British Columbia, and is populated mainly by European settlers, but also by indigenous people. And Helena is a descendant of both. She has a bachelor degree in journalism from Brazil and studied production for film and TV at the New York Film Academy and entertainment business at the Harvard Business School Executive Education. She has worked for several companies in Brazil and the US before creating Stratostorm in 2014. Her main career goal is to keep telling beautiful and touching stories that people will relate to and transform pain into art. Her commitment and passion are inspiring others. Umbrella was her first short film that she directed. As she says, it was a work of love that took years of learning and crafting to bring to life. It's a timeless story about empathy and hope. The short was premiered at the prestigious Tribeca Film Festival that she just came from, because now they had a session with people back without masks in New York. Things are changing. And the movie participated in many other festivals and was listed to the Oscars. More than 13 million people have watched Umbrella. We are glad that you are here to make this number grow and to be inspired by Helena for her work and for her words that you will listen just after. So let's watch Umbrella. Yeah, you can see, Helena, in the chat box that you are still, as always, inspiring and made people super emotional with the film. Really, thank you for this work. Just at the end, we can see that it was inspired in true events, and it's always make everyone curious about that. So could you tell us a little bit about your inspiration, please?
Hello, Alessandra. Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here today to talk to all of you and share a little bit about the story behind the making of Umbrella. Umbrella is a sweet, animated short film that was my passion project and was inspired by a heartbreak through events. Um, was not inspired by refugees itself, but it was inspired by a heartbreak situation that happened with one little child. Um, my family, as Alessandra mentioned, is from Brazil. I'm from Brazil, and back in 2011, my sister she went to visit an orphanage to donate toys to kids, and it was around the Christmas time. And in Brazil, in December, it's summertime, so it was a warm and sunny day, and she brought toys to all of those kids in this shelter home. When she got there, most of the kids they were so excited about the toys, and one little boy, he was 6 years old at the time, he didn't want any of the toys. He kept on asking for an umbrella, and then my sister saw that something was off, and like he kept on going close to a window and asking for an umbrella. So she decided to spend some time talking to him to find out why an umbrella was so important to him. And after a while, he told her, can you imagine, like a 6-year-old boy, he turned to my sister and says, I want an umbrella because when my father left me here it was raining, and he said that he would come back to pick me up, and he never came back. So I think if I have an umbrella, my father is gonna find me. Sorry, every time that I tell this story, I get very emotional because this story broke my heart. My sister called me, and my husband and I, we start talking about this situation, and we start reflecting and discussing that how our memories are important to us. How this little boy, he was so young and he had such like difficult memories. The only thing that he could remember of was his father, a raining day, and an umbrella. And that point on, I felt in my heart that I wanted to tell a story to inspire other people and also warn other people that we cannot judge others without knowing what is their own story. We cannot jump into conclusions before knowing what the other person is going through. And my main goal with this story was to share the message of empathy, that we really need to put ourselves in the other shoes. And Umbrella has such like a beautiful message of hope and empathy that now being here today speaking to all of you, I think it's the most rewarding thing for me during this whole process of the film, because Umbrella got into places that I've never imagined before. It went to so many houses and so many people got inspired by the film. And this little film with about 8 minutes was able to help others, help people to understand the importance of not judging others and the importance of empathy.
And how did you connect it with the refugee? Because you need to find a story for that father. Why you thought that it was a good one to share?
Hi, Alessandra. Like when we were making the film, the whole goal of the film was to give this message of not judging others. And when we wrote the narrative of the film, we tried to find what would make people not judge the father, what would make people just feel, and what would break their hearts. And unfortunately, a lot of people, when you see like refugees, and when you see some of the images that we portrayed in the film, you can connect so easily with the story. You can feel what the other is going through. Like we sadly know that these people are looking for a better chance at life, and they flee their countries, they flee their homes, looking for a better chance at life. And this is what happened in our story. The fact that the father abandoned the boy was because was his only, was the best option that he had at the moment. We didn't want people to ask questions why the father did that. Is the father a bad person, is a good person? It's not about that. It's about empathy. And we felt that in 10 seconds that we tell the backstory, that we tell why the umbrella is so important to the boy, and we show that he and his father were refugees, there's no questions about it. Like everyone just feel. And the way that we also also we had the music as a character in our film. The music also make us feel all this, these feelings, and we feel our heart like break when we see those images. And this is why how we decided to add the refugees narrative to our short film.
Yeah, and I was when I was watching the movie for the first time, I was thinking about how good you did by the way that you choose to touch people's heart. And I was thinking that we both come from Brazil, a country that still has a huge social disparity. And we always comment that people with privilege sometimes became completely insensitive of seeing poverty every day on their lives. And on the other way around, people that works with refugees and caregivers sometimes have the so-called compassion fatigue. Scholar says that a lot that when we see a lot of news about tragedies such as refugee movements, it also generates something called solidarity fatigue. So people start to avoid watching contents that they don't want to make them feel sad. But still, a lot of professionals that work with social marketing and activists, they still tend to try to put more and more shocking images in order to catch our attention. And I love when you say that you choose to transform suffering into art, pain in poetry. You just touched now about music, but which were the other tools that you used intentionally to touch people's hearts?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say what you're saying, Alessandra, because the way that we created the narrative of Umbrella, even the way that we promoted the film and the way that, like was everywhere in the news, like over the months campaigns for the Oscars, we were not doing publicity on the subject of refugees. People would found out that we had refugees in our narrative when they watched the film. So the film was about a little boy who wants an umbrella, and then we want people to watch and understand why the umbrella was so important to him. And I feel that all of this we wanted the film to have like a beginning, middle, and end. We didn't want to be something abstract that like everyone takes their own conclusions. We just want to like a film that from kids to adults could watch and could understand the message. And the way that we did, the music was a big part of the narrative of the film itself, because we decided to don't use dialogues. We decided to have only the animation, the story, and the music itself to drive us to these emotions. And the when we reveal the refugees in our film is a big surprise, because people don't know, like when they watch the film, they go to see why the umbrella was important to the boy. And in the beginning of the film, it was intentional that we made the little girl be a little bit superficial. She goes there, she just wants her umbrella back, and she wants to go home. And when she finds out that the umbrella is so important to him because it reminds of his father, then we even us as an audience, we understand that it's not only like a cute animated short film. It is a film that has a deep message that make you reflect about all of these things, and make you reflect about empathy, make you reflect about the others. And the fact that the film was out last year, that it was such a difficult year for everyone, the film did help a lot of people. It's still helping a lot of people that watch the film and understand that we need to try to get the positive side out of every situation. As hard as the situations might be, there's always something to learn with the situations that we go through in our lives. And besides the music, I feel that the animation and the story itself was the key elements that drove like people's emotions.
Yeah, thank you. And since you love to inspire people, one thing from your background that caught my attention, it was exactly that you had the idea in 2011 when you were studying at the New York Film Academy, yes, and completed the short film only 2019. I manage that many students from RU that are with us here today, they have their dreams and personal projects, things that inspire them to do right now. Mm-hmm. But then life takes other paths. We start to work for companies or organizations where our personal projects don't fit in. And I think it's the same that happened with you, because you worked for so many years with advertisement and entertainment, but in a more commercial way. How did you manage to keep your dream alive and your personal project? And then when you finally do it, it's this huge success.
Yeah, I feel that all of us, like each individual has like personal dreams, and this often happens that people give up halfway through, or you just think that it's too far away to, to bring to life, or to, to bring your dream to life. So the way that we did, when I heard this story, Alessandra, somehow I knew in my heart that I want to tell this story one day. My husband and I, we didn't know when this would be, but we knew that one day we would like to, make this film. We didn't even work with animation at the time that we wrote the film, but we used to watch a lot of Pixar animated short films, and we always got inspired by 3D animation, and this was something that we always want to make it. But we, as more as we start working with, post-production and animation, our dream was getting like further and further, because it's so hard to put everything together. There's so many things that need to align for you to create a good animated project, and it takes time, as everything in our lives takes time. Nothing happens one day to another. Like everything takes time, it takes experience for you to do something, right? And we start working with post-production and animation, and I knew that somehow one day I would like to bring the project to life. And then in the beginning, I thought I would connect the dots and try to raise the finance, and try to, I would put together the team to create the project. And I never imagined myself as a director, but everything in the film was so personal to me. Even all the characters, they're inspired by someone. They look like someone from my family. As you mentioned in the beginning, like my father's side, they are Brazilian indigenous, and my mom's side, they're all immigrants from Ukraine and Poland. So my family is a huge mix of, cultures and backgrounds, and the whole visuals of the characters are inspired by someone from my family. And not even this, the whole story, the way that I talk about the story, like my passion about this project did allow me to direct the film. So we, when we opened our company, Mario and I, we tried to squeeze in our free time. We thought that we would be able to, to produce the project in our free time, but then this was not possible, because animation takes a lot of time. Everything is created on the computer. It's countless hours of work, and then took some years for us to plan financially. And then when we felt that we were ready and our team was ready to take on the challenge of producing this project, something that we've never done before, there's a lot of technical aspects that we didn't work before, a lot of cloth simulation, hair simulation, the animation of the characters itself, so many things that we've never did before. So it took us from 2015 till 2019 to, we scattered over the months, like few months of production in 1 year, few months of production another year, and then finally in 2018, we said, now that we're ready, let's just start working nonstop, and we're just gonna finish when the project is ready. Of course, we had a tiny budget. We had, like a very tight schedule, and we were a team of very few people. Like in the total, we were 5 animators and 9 3D artists, which is a very little team for a 3D animated project, and took us, like total 20 months of production. But one thing that I'm gonna tell you, like when you have a story or when you have a dream, it doesn't matter what it is, you have to keep fighting. The road sometimes is lonely because it's only you and your dream and your desire of doing something, and you're gonna find people on your way that are gonna help you. If you really believe in your story, you should never give up. I feel that as storytellers, when we hear a story or when we create a story that ourselves we get emotional when we talk about that, I'm sure that this is the right path, because and also stories inspired by true events or true people, they're always the best. And as storytellers, we need to keep the eyes open with everything that happens in our lives every day. Like even this story about the little boy, like was 5 minutes that my sister spent talking to this boy, and this heartbreaking story, like now it's being told in an art form that it's going, around the globe.
Yeah. Helena, I want you to, I'm so sorry that we don't have much more time, but I want just to catch what you were talking, because if you want to stay with us, the program head of the Master of Arts International and Intercultural Communications, and Lee, will introduce now the Councillor Sharmarke Dubow, and you will hear a little bit about his life. And from the first time that I read about his life, he is really inspiring, and it's maybe a project for a future short film. You will see. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Alessandra. And also, thank you, Helena. What a great movie. When you are talking to each other, the chat box is full of praises, and many of us are sharing this short movie with our families. I showed your movie last week to the whole school, and all the colleagues found, this is so touching, this is so real, and this makes real sense on how we connect to each other. And the website of your movie also, the rainy day, a boy with an umbrella, it's also very touching. And I learned from my French students that whenever you see it's raining, because the sky is crying. And so I think you made all of us, including the sky, cries, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's really the time for us to return to our heart and also touch each other's. With that, I like to introduce the councillor in Victoria, Sharmarke Dubow, to our seminar. He's from Somalia, and he's the first Black city councillor to be elected in Victoria in 152 years. And Dubow sits on various regional services and civic committees, including recently served the Victoria Regional Transit Commission. Outside of his city's duties, he's a board member of Victoria Coalition for Survivors of Torture, Broadband Institute, Climate Caucus, and Vancouver Island Human Rights Coalition. He's a longtime former board member of the Canadian Council for Refugees and has previously worked at both Intercultural Association of Great Victoria and the Victoria Immigrant and Refugee Services Centre. And his outstanding activism has garnered him various awards and recognition, including Victoria Community Leadership Awards 2017, and becoming a winner of the 2020 RBC Top 25 Canadian Immigrant Awards. And before he moved to Canada in 2012 and settled in Victoria, he worked in Egypt and in the Africa and the Middle East refugee assistance. And for more than 20 years, Sharmarke was a refugee himself, living with great uncertainty, and he brings his perspective to all of his work with the city and the wider community. And let's welcome Councillor Dubow.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's such a pleasure to join with you today. And I want to begin to acknowledge and give my gratitude to the Lungquankam peoples on whose tradition territory that I'm virtually joining to you. The Songhees and Esquimalt and Wasanix people whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day, including those of us who call Canada home and who came here as either immigrants or refugees, settlers, either in this generation or generation past, and to those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly the result of the transatlantic slave trade. And I do make this acknowledgement as a city leader, not as some sort of historical footnote, but as a commitment to a true and lasting reconciliation with the Indigenous people. And today is a Indigenous Day, as June 21st, and I want to acknowledge that. As Victoria and City of Victoria, the capital of British Columbia, is a culturally diverse place, and it's becoming more diverse by the day, and is the homeland of the Songhees and Esquimalt people, on which welcomed newcomers for thousands of years. And the percentage of the newcomers, when we say newcomers in the Canadian context, we are referring people who came to the region and to the country at least 5 years ago. And 20% of Victorian population are newcomers, or people who are new immigrants or refugees to Canada who've settled in Victoria, according to the 2016 census. And before I got into my discussion, as today is the Indigenous Day, I would love to read a quote that Honorable Maurice Singler, who was a former senator of Canada, he was speaking to newcomers, of those folks who recently arrived, either migrants, refugees, or immigrants. To them, he spoke to them about the country, about reconciliation, and something he said I often share because it really talks to me, and it is a message to not only myself, but to all newcomers. And here is what he said: you might not have the responsibility for the past, but you do have a responsibility for the future, because you made commitment to this country. And the responsibility for the future is reconciliation. So that means you will still have to understand what this history is. You have to understand what it has done to this country. You have to understand what's doing to this country. You have to understand what it will continue to do unless we change. And the leadership from those newcomers communities that occupy more and more leadership positions in government also need to figure out where they fit to the dialogue around change for the future, because they do fit. They're going to be influential leaders in this conversation. And I thought that was a very important statement to newcomers who come and join this big, large family of Canada. And I love the movie, and I think one way to really create empathy and relationships and build bridges is through theater, through movies, because it really evokes emotions. While sometimes when we share facts and statistics, and it is hard that it speaks to the public, but through theater and movies, it's a great way. And it was really watching the movie and seeing how it really speaks to the human emotion, regardless which background, economic background, or your race, and where you grew up. At the end of the day, it really touches the core of human being. And I think that's the power of movies. So as we are speaking about World Refugee Day, I wanted to, before I share things about myself or my work, is really important to, and I'm sure a lot of folks who are listening or in this room would understand the terminology, but we use a lot of terminologies such as immigrants, migrant, asylum seeker, refugee, foreigner, expat, citizen. So words matter, and words and language really matter, and how we use. So as we celebrating refugees, I would love to define the definition of refugee, because that is important, and because refugees have a legal protection. And when we hear the word refugee, it is different in terms of the how it's tied to legal framework. So refugees, in definition, are people who are forced to leave their home and countries because of a serious human rights abuse. Who's outside? They have to be outside of their country. They have to have a well-founded fear, and they have to be persecuted. And that is very important. And there's 5 criteria, which I'm not going to go into it, that goes under the well-founded fear. And the whole concept of World Refugee Day really began strong after the World War II, because the world leaders came together, including Canada, came together and said never again. And that was because the world was ashamed of the Holocaust and what happened. And the world leaders didn't want that ever to happen again. And anyone who seek protection should be offered that protection. And countries became signatory to the 1951 Convention law. And one of the key important of that law, those countries who became signatory, is the idea of non-revealment. That means that the people's dignity and well-being will be preserved and will not be returned to places that they might face risk and persecution. And I think that is important, as the world is changing daily, and countries are becoming more closed rather than global and opening up. And COVID-19 has really showed the inequities and disparities and inequalities that exist within our community, but also around the world. So the Charter of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human have affirmed the principle that human beings shall enjoy the fundamental rights and freedom without discrimination. And that's the whole concept of refugees when people come. It's not a charity, it is moral obligation and legal, the commitment we made when we signed those principles. So there are 2 other aspects to that. The ONU Convention, which is a specific aspect refugees problems in Africa. So the African Union, now known as African Union, but previously the AOU, African Organization of African Union. So they have their own convention, and the whole idea was prima facie mechanism. That means when a lot of refugees come, influx of refugees, they could be accepted under the same umbrella, because not the whole refugee determination of an individual seeking protection and looking into that. So and that was convention, and which also led to faster and accepting refugees rather than focusing individual status determination. And there is also the Cartagena Declaration in Latin America, which also focuses on generalized violence, internal aggression, massive violation of human rights, and which wasn't speaking deeply to the 1951 convention. And just to really put into context of the refugee aspect of it, in Canada, the Supreme Court in 1985, there was a decision called Singh decision. And why is Singh decision in Canadian domestic aspect of it very important? Was that the Supreme Court found that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom protects the fundamental rights of refugees. So the court decided that everyone, including refugees claimants, in the sentence that everyone in the charter, the sentence says everyone has the right to life, liberty, security, of freedom, and the rights not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principle of fundamental justice. So refugee claimants are therefore entitled oral hearing in the accordance of the principle of fundamental justice and international law. And I think that is very important when refugees come to countries. It's not, countries are not doing favor. They really, they have legal agreements. And so that means when a refugee comes to Canada, that asylum seeker has the right to be heard, but the right to stay is another question. That is the determination of their well-founded fear, the determination of persecution. So no one have the right to stay in terms of our legal instrument, but they have the right to be heard. And today, as also the Indigenous Day, I just want to highlight 3 points where the refugees have connection with the Indigenous and will have that more empathy with the Indigenous community than any other community. One is the history of displacement. And refugees would understand that out of any other communities. And refugees would have that high empathy with the Indigenous community, because Indigenous community also has been displaced. The other one is family separation. The refugees are exiled and would understand that family separation. Displacement, I was displaced when I was 8 years old, and I was the both people. So my story of refugee started when I was 8 years old. It's not that I chose to be a refugee. I didn't decide to leave my home country. My family decided. So my own mother making the most difficult decision when we were displaced, putting myself and sister on a boat to be safe. I think it is the most difficult decision any parent could ever make. But the reality is, when a conflict happens, women and children are the victims and susceptible to violence, gender-based violence, and children adopted to child war. So always children and women are always a victim of a conflict in any area. So, and that's why today almost half of the displaced people, refugees, are children and women. The other one that refugees relate to Indigenous family separation. I have been separated from my family. Some of them I haven't seen them for 30 years until recently. So that family separation, exile stories is really has that connection. And that separation is everything you know. You all protective factors, you know, your community you grew up as a child, you know, you never knows by name, you never is where your parents. So when you removed from that, and those were the protective factors, then you experience war, violence, living in a countries where that you can't access national programs. So that itself, then you don't have that protective factors of your family, relatives, you know, any family would relate to that. And I think refugees have that connection with the indigenous community. And the other one is uprooted. You are uprooted from everything you knew and everything you've built from generation to generation. One day, suddenly, either conflict happened, or you were a political, you spoke and the government didn't like that, and now they're after you. So to be uprooted, everything you've known and who you are over suddenly, that is the experience of refugees, and coming to other countries and starting all over again is the reality of refugees. And just to conclude, that more than 85% of refugees are not in the Western countries. They are in the least developing and developing countries, such as Uganda, Kenya, and Thailand, and other countries that they end up at the border countries. Now Venezuela and asylum seekers and refugees, we see that when they end up at the border countries. So when we talk about the refugee aspect of it, it's good to be reminded that they are different than an immigrant. They're different than migrants, although they might have, in relation with the economic challenges, the reasons of economic, all that. On the top of that, they have a well-founded fear and persecution, and maybe sometimes some immigrants might decide when they want to leave and might sell their house and plan their immigration, but refugees don't have that privilege because it could happen over one night. So for me, and someone who 20 years was moving country to country, borders to borders, and having different refugee status, and figuring out how to exist in uncertainty and not knowing what will happen next for 20 years. And that is the experience of refugees. So when COVID-19 hit, and if there is any community that we can learn from how we felt the 18 months of the whole world shut down, and the world feeling, and communities and countries and cities feeling fearful and not knowing what will happen next, the uncertainty, the unknown. Refugees know that. Those things are very familiar because some of them, 3 generations, they live in an urban or a camp context, and they don't know what tomorrow brings. So they live day-to-day life and still keep the hope and have that empathy. And just to conclude, I was very happy to see such a movie, because at the end of the day, we all humans, you know, we don't decide what will happen to us. And COVID-19 showed us that things could change over a blink of an eye. You were planning for holidays, you were planning weddings, you were planning graduations, you had plans, and then all of a sudden COVID hit. You were not even asked to be ready, or this will happen, you know, and you were not given 2 weeks ahead that this is what is going to happen. And that is the reality of asylum seekers and refugees. And when they come to our doors, the question is, what programs do we have? And statistics and data showed actually when refugees come, they add to the economic, culture, the social life, and they make us more vibrant, they make us more secure, they make us more safe, because most of the refugees could be also victims of terrorism. And the majority of refugees around the world, and a high number of refugees are Muslims. And now today we see countries confusing refugees with terrorism and terrorists, and using scapegoating language. And that goes back to my beginning of the discussion, the Holocaust. It all started such languages of dehumanization and hate and xenophobia. And genocide doesn't happen over one night. We've seen in Rwanda, we've seen the Holocaust. It happens because the language we use and what we accept. So this is the time as a community we have to increase empathy and to understand the other human being. They're not different from us. So I will conclude there, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Councillor Dubow. This is so powerful, and this is also very helpful. You give us the historical overview and also the local perspectives, as well as your personal experience. Thanks for sharing with us. And I'm aware of our time. We approximately have 10 more minutes to go. And all the audience, feel free to type in your questions in the chat box, and we will make sure, squeeze enough of these questions to Councillor Dubow. And if you also have questions for Helena, also post that in the chat box. And we will make sure we follow up with all the presenters and connect with you with the answers. I have Athena already asking a question. Would you please ask the question? Put your question verbally already to Councillor Dubow. Yes.
Thank you, Zany. Thank you, Sharmarke, Councillor Dubow. And also thank you, Helena, for your remarks. I do have a question for Councillor Dubow, and actually I'll have a question for Helena, if I may just take the platform to speak here. So first, Councillor Dubow, what's going on locally in Victoria now that you're elected to support refugees in the Greater Victoria region? And Helena, I noticed that you have in the background 2 little figurines of your main characters, and I just wanted you to comment on that, what the story is behind those. So please, over to you, Sharmarke, and then Helena. Thank you. And thank you, Zany.
Thank you for that question. As the bio, the brother was reading, there are a lot of agencies that work with refugees and immigrants, such as the Intercultural Association, Victoria Immigrant Refugee, and the library and other agents. But particularly what the city of Victoria is doing is that for the first time, we are working on a welcoming city strategy, because as a city, we want to be global competitive, and we want to tap on the potential of the people. So strong communities really connect and actively include people of all backgrounds. And so a welcoming city can meet its highest civic and economic potential to unleash the power of its biggest asset, which is the people. So we've invited all the agencies, including the library, ethnocultural, the Songis, Squamalt, youth, Frankfurt, and magazines, the police department. So to build a strategy of welcome so that, that the city could really serve everyone, but so that immigrants and refugees could also be removed all the barriers so they can create more businesses and succeed and reach their potential. And again, we have, for the first time, Equity and Inclusion Diversity Office, and trying to embed equity in all our policies. And for the refugees who arrive, for the regional transit, yearly they have annual pass, so that they could, the rent is expensive, so that they could adjust. So there's a lot of programs, but I want to give shout out to ICA and VERX and all the settlement workers that every day help to navigate, help newcomers and refugees navigate the system.
Thank you, Sharmarke. And Helena, over to you. Thank you.
So inspired to hear him and see everything that is happening there. I wish like next time we can all meet in person and I can see with my own eyes all of these like initiatives that you're doing there. So about the characters, we did with a Brazilian artist there. It's all handmade, like in clay and like hand painted. So we did that as a memory for us to keep with us these action figures, but they're actually being really quite a hit. Like a lot of people are asking where can they find this, but so far like we have only for ourselves, for Mario and I, but we're planning like in the future to have more, like to like maybe to give away to people, like the way that we did, like the way that we did the whole strategy of our film. We also did something thinking of helping others. We did everything for free, right? Like it's available on YouTube for everyone, can go there and watch, like it's not in any of the streaming platforms. So we try to reach as many people as we can with the film, and I think this is gonna be the path with these two little guys here as well.
Thank you so much, Helena. And we all like to meet each other in person. But I also noticed on the chat box that we also found that this is also a very influential and powerful way to connect us from different parts of the world. And really, your movie is a connecting point for us. And we hope that we can carry on the spirit and be more helpful to each other, and also be more non-judgmental to each other on every event. I'd like to pass back to Selena and to see if we have any endnotes for our session today.
Thank you so much, everyone. We have had such a full and engaging and heartfelt session today. So what I'll do, we have a quick final slide to make sure we have all of the resources available to continue connecting with the 2021 World Refugee Day. I've seen some folks also pop their Twitter handles and social media content in our chat box. So please continue to do that so we can connect post-session. And I believe I'm going to pass the microphone over to Professor Ken Christie to share some final thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Selena, and a big thank you to Selena, Zenyi, Athena, Alessandra, Helena, and Sharmarke. And I apologize if I've missed anyone out, but I think that it's been a fantastic exploration of what it means to be a refugee in 2021 World Refugee Day. I think the film was absolutely fantastic in terms of showing that, and the side that we really need to develop when we're looking at refugees and migrants and displaced people, and that is empathy, of course, actually trying to step into their shoes and not just have sympathy for them, but actually have empathy. And in the Human Security and Peacebuilding program, of course, that's one of the things we try to teach students, empathy, and how to act on that empathy, how to take care of other people, how to think of other people, and of course, how to work in a world where we've seen a lot of populist movements develop, where you have racism, you have discrimination in politics and amongst the general public, and the very tragic incident, for instance, of the family who were run over in Ontario, in London, Ontario, a few weeks ago. And, the very sad events where, these people are immigrating to a country to make a better life for themselves and doing so well. And this tragic racist, extremist kind of behavior occurs. So we have to think about, how we can work in society to change things so that these things do not happen, and how we can accept refugees, welcome refugees, and bring in refugees into our community. And as Sharmarke said, refugees and migrants are such a huge part of our social fabric, in the sense that they give something back to the community, they give something back to society, and we should be really welcoming them and accepting them as part of a very rich and diverse social fabric that we want in Canada and elsewhere, of course. So I'd just like to say thank you for the film, the discussion, and I hope we can continue this because it's so important, and especially again today on Canada's National Indigenous Day, which is why I'm wearing an orange T-shirt. By the way, it's not typically my color, but we're having other events to celebrate this, and this fits in so well. So, thank you, and thanks so much again for organising this.